This is the Sunday school lesson for this coming Sunday, which is Palm Sunday, April the 5th. And it's also called Passion Sunday because we cover the story of the Passion. Baptists traditionally don't like having Good Friday services. I don't know why. We just sort of do our Sunday thing and Wednesday night prayer meeting. But the idea of throwing in, now we've been doing Maundy Thursday for years, and I'm really missing that. That's one of my favorite services of the whole year. But we don't traditionally do a Good Friday service. So on Palm Sunday, we're going to get ourselves from Palm Sunday to the crucifixion in one sermon. And so we've been talking about casting stones, a stone's throw away, and we're going to look at stepping stones to get Jesus across the Jordan. So I hope you'll tune in. This is a Sunday school lesson, however, and it's going to be saved. So I have no idea when you're actually going to watch it. But let me just read you. This is Matthew 27. This is the story of the crucifixion. We're already through the trial. We are into the crucifixion proper. This is Matthew 27. Begin reading in verse 33. And when they came to the place called the skull, Golgotha, they gave him wine to drink mixed with gall, and after tasting it, he was unwilling to drink it. And they had there to crucify him. Then they divided up his garments among themselves, casting lots. And sitting down, they began to keep watch over him. Above his head there was placed a charge, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." And at that time, 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and the other on the left. Now, it's important to realize that each of the Gospels tells a little bit different story. And we tend, especially around Christmas and Easter, to sort of merge those stories into one narrative. And we sort of cut and paste them to sort of make them work out. And that's why sometimes you'll have Tenebrae services where you read the 7 sayings of Christ on the cross. But he didn't say 7 on any one of the Gospels. You have to thread them together like a beads on a necklace. But each Gospel writer tells a little bit different story. So we're going to look at the way Matthew tells his story. So Jesus crucified. Above his head there is the charge, Jesus, the King of the Jews. And there's 2 robbers crucified, one on each side of him. Now, and those who were passing by hurled insults and wagging their heads, saying, "You who were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, among the scribes and the elders, they were mocking him, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. If he is the King of Israel, let him come down from the cross. Then we will believe in him. He trusted in God. Let him rescue him now if he delights in him. He said, 'I am the Son of God.'" And the robbers also who were crucified with him were insulting him with the same words. Now, this shows sort of a narrowing of the insults. We start with the crowd sees Jesus and they mock him and say, "You were going to, destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. You can't even save yourself." Then the religious officials that were there, they insult him. In fact, quoting scripture, they quote Psalm 22 as an insult. And they say, if God delights in you, then let him take care of you. That's what it promises in Psalm 22. And then ultimately the robbers are also insulting him. So we go from think of a camera angle. We go from, where's the camera? Oh, it's up here. We go from the crowd far away, the religious officials closer, and all the way up to the criminals right with him. Everybody's insulting him all along the way. And it is reminiscent in some ways of the temptation in the desert. When Satan comes to Jesus and says, just turn the stone into bread. Throw yourself down and God will catch you. Bow down to me and I'll give you all the nations of the world. And the idea is use your superior strength, and if you really are the Son of God, use those resources to your own advantage. the truth is that Jesus could have come down off that cross. His willingness to suffer was not a sign of weakness, but rather a sign of incredible control and grace. I always think of, I don't know, I don't know if any of you remember the old TV show Kung Fu. And so this guy, it's a long story, but he is a kung fu master from the Shaolin Temple in China, and he's a master of kung fu, and yet he's come to the United States, and he's just trying to sort of live as a refugee. I think a long time he works on the railroad, and I don't know, it's not important. But the point is, people harass him and give him a hard time because he's Asian in a culture that's not, and he's quiet and keeps to himself, and people harass him, and all the time, it's kind of like people with a stick poking a bear, that this guy could destroy them, and yet he's not. That control, that Jesus is on the cross dying, he already prayed in the garden that he didn't, if there was any other way to do this, and since there isn't, he was willing to surrender his own desire to save us. So in that charge, he saved others, himself he cannot save. It's actually the reverse. He can't save himself because he wants to save others. Now, after we're done with the insulting, it says that, but this was at the 6th hour, darkness fell across the whole earth. That's high noon. In Jewish timekeeping, 6 in the morning is when you start the day. So the 6th hour is noon. So at noon, it became dark. And then it remained dark until the 9th hour, so 3 o'clock in the afternoon. In the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, what's really interesting here is that the religious officials quoted Psalm 22 to insult Jesus and said, if God really trusts you, then he should deliver you. Jesus, in his dying words, quotes Psalm 22, the beginning. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? But if you read through the rest of the psalm, it's actually a psalm of hope that says, even in the midst of my trials, even in the midst of my suffering, God is going to see me through. And Jesus doesn't quote the whole thing. If you think about it, if you could imagine somebody, a Christian martyr who is somebody who's being tortured and somebody that's about to die for their faith, and they began, if they began by saying, Our Father who art in heaven, you know the rest of the prayer. You know where they were going. If somebody who, again, is on their deathbed and begins to sing, and they sing Amazing Grace, you know everything else that goes with it. So Jesus starts back at the beginning. Rather than pick a verse out of the middle, he starts back at the beginning and says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? But it's a psalm of confidence. Our literature writer had a really interesting point. And let me see if I can find it quickly. Well, he said that it's important to think about this. Oh, here we go. He says that only those who have great confidence in God can be disappointed when God remains aloof. All of us have had prayers for God to help us, save us. Somebody we know ourselves or somebody we know is suffering. And we pray to God for relief. And God doesn't answer that prayer. And we feel frustrated. We feel aggravated. And we might even be angry with God. And Phil Yancey has a wonderful book called Disappointment with God. Now, the point is, the only people who can be disappointed are the people who have such strong and confidence in God. And even their doubt is couched in belief. You see, unbelievers, they don't wonder where God is. They don't believe in him. And when bad things happen, they don't say, well, where's God? They don't believe him anyway. But people who have a rock solid belief in God, when they go through difficult testing times, it's not uncommon for us to wonder why God isn't doing what we want him to do. But we have confidence that he knows what he is doing. So Jesus, even his phrase, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" He is in fact declaring his confidence in God. Now, some that were standing there thought he was calling for Elijah. Jesus speaks Aramaic. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani is Aramaic. I don't know if they got Aramaic confused with Hebrew. At that day, virtually everybody spoke Aramaic in Jesus' circle. Most Jews could understand Hebrew because that's what the formal language is. Aramaic is close to Hebrew. And then, of course, people would speak Greek or Latin depending on how educated they were and what kind of world they lived in. But so they said, "Oh, he's calling for Elijah. Let's see if he shows up." And then they run up to give him some more of that nasty wine, and Jesus refused it. And then they said, "Well, let's just see if Elijah shows up." And then Jesus cried out with a loud voice, and he yielded up his spirit. That's it. Jesus cries out with a loud voice and gives up his spirit. And then the after effect of that, this is verse 51. The veil of the temple was torn from the top to the bottom. The earth shook and rocks were split. Tombs were opened and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they entered the holy city and appeared to many. So in Matthew's telling of this story, Jesus dies on the cross with a final yell of torment. He gives up his spirit. And then it's as if nature itself is being in revolt. Everything is being shaken because God there is dead on the cross. And it's almost as if nature refuses to accept that as reality. So it says, first of all, it was darkness from noon until 3 in the afternoon. And then it literally says the world shook. This is a literal, like the entire world shook. And then the veil of the temple was split from top to bottom. And this is really important to Matthew. Matthew is really writing his gospel with the Jewish mind and thinking of trying to tell the story of the Messiah to the Jewish community. And that veil is very important. Judaism at that time, ancient Judaism, is built on what's called a theology of exclusion. So, the closer you get to God, the fewer that can go there. So let's go in reverse. The Holy of Holies is in the very center, back of the temple. It's where the Ark of the Covenant is. There's this veil, and only the high priest can go there one day of year, on the Day of Atonement. Other than that, no one's allowed in there ever. Now then the rest of the temple is where priests go to do their priestly thing, to offer sacrifices, to put the bread, to light the candles, to say the prayers. The priests are allowed in the temple. But the average Jew, the average person, could never get in there. It's reserved only for the priest. Then you come out to an outer courtyard, and there Jewish men are allowed to go, no women. Then the next court is a place for women to worship. Then behind that is a place for the Gentiles. So that in their understanding, the closer you get to God, the fewer are allowed to go there. And when Jesus dies on the cross and the world shakes, almost as a way of illustrating that the world is now different, that veil is torn. And that veil separated everybody from the presence of God. And Jesus' death on the cross makes it possible for everyone to come into the presence of God. And for Matthew, this is a way of shaking everything up and saying there is a new reality. That Jesus is the new Moses who brought a new law and a new covenant for that we can come to know God personally in a way that was never even possible before. And so after all of this happens, then there's a centurion there. And the centurion who were there keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, they became very frightened and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." So that event, seeing all of that transpire in real time, convinced even a hardened military man to look at the cross, look at Jesus, see what was going on, and say this was the Son of God. So our Sunday school lesson today is a review of the cross, reminding us that with the death of Jesus, we all have access to God, to forgiveness, to grace. I'm looking to see if there's anything else I wanted to make sure I didn't leave out of here. And all of this is contingent on this really weird idea of what kind of a king is crucified. Think of that sign over Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And so to all the political people and the religious people, the religious authorities of that day, as they watched this scene, they really thought this is it. Nobody can claim to be king and then be nailed to a cross. Nobody can claim to speak for God and yet hang there and suffer, and God does not come to his defense. But Jesus knew from the Garden of Gethsemane on that there was something at work, a bigger picture, that God was in the process of saving humanity. But to do that, it meant that his son would die. So this is our Sunday school lesson for today, and I'm going to save it here so you can listen to it anytime you want. And we'll bring a message tomorrow on Palm Sunday. And I'm going to try this week on Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday to bring a devotion dealing with those special days as we enter into Holy Week together. So God bless you, and thanks for listening.